Hello Internet and welcome back to Tech Tactics. Today we're rewinding the clock to take another look at the Asus Strix GTX 960, a GPU that launched way back in 2015. Now, over a decade later, and in true Tech Tactics style, the big question is, can it still game? Let's dive in and find out. But first, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. If you're hunting for great deals on game keys and software, G2A.com, where you can find discounts on all the keys you need. Before diving into the gameplay, let's take a quick look at the specs of the Asus Strix GTX 960. Built on NVIDIA's Maxwell architecture, this GPU has a base clock of 1228 MHz and a boost clock of up to 1291 MHz. It comes with 1024 CUDA cores, 32 ROPs and 4GB of GDDR5 memory. With a 128-bit bus, it offers a memory bandwidth of 112.2 GB per second. Despite its limitations, it's quite power efficient, with a TDP of just 120 watts. For today's test, the system setup includes an Intel i9-13900K processor, an Asus TUF Z790 motherboard and a whopping 64GB of ultra-fast DDR5 RAM. Now that we've got the specs out of the way, let's see how this card holds up in actual gameplay. Starting with Fallout 4, we're running the updated next-gen version on Steam at 1080p with medium graphics settings. Motion blur is disabled because nobody wants to feel like they're fumbling through a Vault-Tec training simulator, and depth of field is set to the bokeh effect for a more cinematic touch. It's also worth noting that interest in Fallout has surged lately thanks to its hit TV series, which returns later this year with Season 2, set in none other than New Vegas. So, if you're planning to revisit the wasteland, now is a great time. During gameplay, the GPU drew around 100 watts of power, which is impressively efficient by today's standards. For context, most mid-range graphics cards typically consume between 150 and 250 watts under load. Performance-wise, the Asus Strix GTX 960 managed an average of 71 FPS. The 1% lows dipped to 41 FPS and the 0.1% lows dipped to 15 FPS. The next game is Assassin's Creed Unity, running at 1080p resolution with high graphics settings and FXAA anti-aliasing enabled. Ubisoft and their recreation of Paris during the French Revolution still holds up visually, even today. Released in 2014, it comes from an era when Assassin's Creed games felt more grounded and enjoyable. Now, let's talk performance. Assassin's Creed Unity uses about 4GB of VRAM and consumes roughly 100 watts of power. The Asus Strix GTX 960 maintains a temperature of 65 degrees under full GPU load, delivering an average frame rate of 50 FPS, with 1% lows around 39 FPS and 0.1% lows dropping to 16 FPS. Kingdome Come Deliverance runs smoothly at 1080p on high graphics settings. Though this game launched back in 2018, I only recently decided to jump into it after playing its sequel. My first impression was it feels a bit clunky. The sequel definitely delivers a much smoother gameplay experience. That said, I'm really enjoying the story in the first game, which sets up the journey of Henry and Sir Hans. The game takes place in the Kingdom of Bohemia, what's now the Czech Republic, during the early 15th century. While the gameplay isn't flawlessly smooth at all times, it remains very playable. The GTX 960 achieved an average of 48 FPS, with the 1% low dropping to 31 FPS and the 0.1% low hitting 27 FPS. Next, we're running Syndicate at 1440p resolution with all the settings maxed out. Although this version launched in 2012, it's actually a reboot inspired by the classic 1993 Syndicate from Bullfrog. I spent a lot of my young days on the Commodore Amiga with that game. The original was a real-time tactical game set in a dark dystopian corporate future, truly ahead of its time. The 2012 reboot keeps that intense atmosphere but shifts into a shooter format, offering a very different gameplay experience. The original game managed to carve out its own style that really stood out back then. While newer Syndicate games have tried to revive that feel, they often miss the core elements that made the original so memorable. Performance-wise, the GTX 960 averages 86 FPS, with 1% lows at 58 FPS and 0.1% lows dropping to 38 FPS. Next up is Grand Theft Auto 4 at 1080p resolution on medium settings, with night shadows turned off to help deal with the game's notoriously poor optimization. Now, while Rockstar hasn't confirmed anything official, there's been some solid chatter about a possible GTA 4 remaster. Reliable insider Tez2 hinted that a modern console port could land by the end of 2025. A lot of fans think that this might be Rockstar's way of filling the gap after the GTA 6 delay, though it's more likely of a re-release with a few upgrades than a full-blown remaster. Still, the community's been asking for it, and honestly, it would be great to see this classic get the modern treatment it deserves. In Grand Theft Auto 4, the GTX 960 delivers an average of 75 FPS, with 1% lows dropping to 35 FPS and 0.1% lows at 18 FPS. Next up, we're running Far Cry 5 at 1080p with high graphics settings and motion blur turned off. Even though it's an older title, I still enjoy coming back to this one, whether it's sneaking through outposts or getting caught off guard by a surprise bear attack. Here's a fun throwback idea and maybe a great fit for this channel. Is SLI worth it in 2025? I'd love to hear what you think. If you're curious and want to see that video, drop a comment below and share your opinions. In Far Cry 5, a GTX 960 delivers an average of 51 FPS, with a 1% low of 44 FPS and a 0.1% low of 10 FPS. Next up is Deus Ex Mankind Divided, released in 2016, and despite it being nearly a decade old, the game still looks impressive, especially when played at 1080p with high settings and with motion blur and depth of field disabled. Even by today's standards, its graphics remain solid, making it a great benchmark for this card. The game uses about 4GB of VRAM and draws just over 100 watts of power. The best part, you can currently find the GTX 960 on the UK eBay marketplace for as low as £40. It's about $55, making it an incredibly budget choice for gamers. Availability is good right now, with multiple listings offering various conditions and bundles, so you have plenty of options to choose from. In Deus Ex Mankind Divided, the GTX 960 delivers an average frame rate of 46 FPS, with 1% lows dropping to 30 FPS and 0.1% lows at 18 FPS. Next up, we have Star Wars Battlefront 2, running at 1080p resolution with high graphics settings, motion blur turned off, and using DirectX 11 with TAA enabled. Released in 2017 by EA DICE and published by Electronic Arts, continues to maintain a loyal player base. Even today, the developers have supported the game with ongoing updates, balancing tweaks, and with added seasonal events. Recent gameplay videos on YouTube have also contributed to a boost of interest in this game. In terms of performance, the GTX 960 you can expect an average of around 88 FPS, with 1% lows near 69 FPS and 0.1% lows dropping to about 64 FPS. Next up is Half-Life 2, running at 4K resolution with high graphics settings, motion blur turned off and classic effects enabled. Released by Valve in 2004, Half-Life 2 was a groundbreaking game for its time, renowned for its advanced physics, immersive storytelling, and impressive visuals powered by the Source engine. Even though it's now over 20 years old, I've included it in this benchmark to see how modern hardware handles legacy titles. The GTX 960 still holds up well in popular esports games like Fortnite, Apex Legends and Valorant, delivering smooth performance thanks to its relatively modest system demands. However, it begins to show its age when faced with newer, more graphically intensive games. In Half-Life 2, the GTX 960 delivers an average of 253 FPS, with a 1% low of 141 FPS and a 0.1% low at 118 FPS. A solid performance from an older GPU in an older title. The final game is Borderlands 2, running at 1440p with high graphics settings and depth of field turned off. The GTX 960 averages 59 FPS, with a 1% low of 34 FPS and a 0.1% low of 31 FPS. So, is the GTX 960 still worth it in 2025? Well, sort of. It all comes down to what you're playing. For esports titles, the GTX 960 still holds up, delivering smooth gameplay at 1080p and even 4K with low to medium settings. Its 4GB of VRAM does show its age in newer AAA games, but for older, more well-optimised titles, it can still handle the job. If you're into retro gaming, indie games or classic AAA hits from a decade ago, the GTX 960 remains a solid entry-level option. It's power efficient, runs cool, and it's a smart choice for budget or compact builds, especially with rising energy costs in places like the UK. But with that said, for modern AAA games released in the last couple of years, especially those with high VRAM demands, the GTX 960 just doesn't have the horsepower in those cases. Upgrading to a more recent GPU is the better move. I'm not quite ready to say goodbye to this GPU. Released back in 2015, it's had quite the run, delivered countless hours of gameplay and helped define an era of budget-friendly PC gaming. Thank you for watching. I'm David James. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe for more tech content and gaming stuff. I'll see you in the next one.